Y'all have a good trip. Roger that.
You slowly wait for it.
30.
29.
28.
27.
26.
25. 24.
23. 22.
21.
20 seconds and counting.
19.
18. 17.
16. 15.
14.
13.
12.
11.
10 seconds.
6.
5.
4. And a 3.
2.
1.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to this week's edition of the X-Files podcast, Trust No One, where some of my fellow agents and I discuss episodes of the X-Files. Today, we're going to be discussing the 11th episode of the X-Files, and it's called Eve, and it was first aired on the 10th of December in 1993. So, to kick off then, do we think that the younger Eves, Tina, Eve 9, and Cindy, Eve 10, look enough like the adult Eves, such as Eve 6 and Sally Kendrick, Eve 7?
I think they look enough alike, I think it was convincing enough.
Yeah. Did they seem, do you think, I don't know, connected enough in terms of, because they are literally clones of her, aren't they? Did they seem to behave in similar ways or think in similar ways, apart from just what they looked like? Do you think they were similar enough?
Well, they don't necessarily behave the same, do they? With Sally Kendrick.
I think there were from previous conversations. You guys know that I really like actors that are doing the supporting roles or the guest actors, right, who are doing the main kind of villain roles, and I really appreciate the kind of qualities they bring to those characters. And I think the actress that played Eve 7, Eve 6 and 8, whatever. I think there were certain mannerisms that she presented, little sideways looks, little kind of smiles or smirks that she had that was echoed in the Eve 9 and 10, the girls. So I think even though structurally the faces may have looked different, I think the mannerisms were at least resembling the adult actress. So I think it worked.
Excellent. And what did we think of her performance? You know, I personally was really impressed with it. I think it was a very, very complicated role and a lot of different elements that had to be kind of pulled together very quickly. What did we think of her performance overall?
The adult actress?
Yeah.
I was impressed by how much Strange she plays in the episode.
Yeah, I think the meatiest part was the one that was the one that was locked up, that was still held on to, that's obviously very intelligent but also quite psychotic. Right? And yeah, she came off both as dangerous and personable and clever and witty and funny and, you know, vulnerable, which is not always easy to accomplish at the same time. So I think she did a good job.
I agree. I think it was a really challenging role to play.
I thought it was quite impressive, like the going between like the portrayal that you talked about, Brad, where she plays like the confined psychotic older Eve, and Sally Kendrick, who's like clearly like much like calmer when she's interacting with the girls around the table and stuff like that.
I think also how she portrayed the slow descent into death, right, in that episode. Sally Kendrick, the actress, you know, it seems until you see it completely play out, initially it seems out of character for her to do the kinds of things or say the kinds of things in the way that she's saying them. You know, it seems out of place for the character in the first 4 or 5 lines, but then you see that it's building to something, and that's when you really kind of get it, and then how she, you know, builds into that traumatic moment. It's I think she did a great job of representing each character fully.
Mhm.
You know.
So was Dr. Kendrick as insane as the others then, or what were the differences there?
Well, didn't she say something about? Didn't the character some of the lines? She said, someone adopted her or took her in and recognized her for what she was and nurtured her, something like that. So I
Yeah.
get the sense that that was the difference, and that was where they were talking about nature versus nurture, right? So you could have a certain nature, but nurture puts a little patina, or helps rough out some of the edges so that you are a better fit in society. If that makes sense.
I thought she wasn't insane, but I thought she was naive to trust the pair of girls and assume they wouldn't be psychotic.
I thought that as well, given the fact that they literally just both killed someone. I was like, why are you sitting around the table just assuming that you're not going to be next? It did feel naive. And I think maybe it was one of those, she was attempting to save what she thought she could from them. And yes, they'd done something wrong, but there was a way back. And, it was, it was a way of kind of attempting maybe to save herself or proving to them that there was another way. I thought the fact that she talks quite strongly about you're going to need significant medication, you're going to need significant care, but there is another way to live. I thought that was a really interesting one as well to consider.
I wondered whether there was like a base rest. I mean, it struck me like she wasn't just making a clone, but rather she may have been experimenting on how to improve upon, tweak, so to speak. And I got the feeling that she didn't recognize the skill that the girls were exhibiting, this foreknowledge or this communication, this nonverbal communication, even at a distance. Right? She didn't know that they had that ability. It might have been something new that didn't manifest for the younger Eves, or rather for the older Eves. The first batch of Eves. But because it would have been odd for her not to remember that aspect of her childhood, right?
I
Yeah.
thought it was interesting that I thought it was interesting that they seemed to be like referring to like what I had thought was a real phenomenon, but I'm not entirely sure, which is like sort of things that seem coincidental, perhaps occurring between twins in reality.
Yeah. There's a huge amount of documented cases of twins who've been separated at birth and yet end up having incredibly similar life patterns, to the point where they marry a person called Tom each in the same year, in the same style of wedding. They have a favorite vacation spot that basically is a very similar thing, just in different locations. So yeah, there is. And I mean, studies on twins are really interesting anyway, aren't they? Because it's that idea of, well, what is nature, what is nurture, which is the question that Brad raised a little bit earlier. And so I think these twins having that connection and having that telepathic ability, it's whether it extends beyond that. I mean, when they first, I can't remember which way around it is, but the first girl, when she meets Mulder and she talks about red lightning and she talks about all this, the people from the sky, the cloud men, it's almost like she's read his mind and is saying, oh, he wants to hear a UFO story, I'll give him a UFO story, and you could understand it between twins almost, but then that extra capacity, extra ability seems quite out there, and it does seem to be this massive leap forward in terms of progress from the original experiment, I think.
That was Tina, Eve 9.
Tina, that's it. Yeah. So was there enough intrigue in this episode then? Did it feel intriguing enough?
Well, I think we need to put the episode in the context of the era, right? Because in the 80s and 90s, they were really working on the Human Genome Project, and they were really focusing on, cloning was a popular scientific endeavor from the 70s onward. And Dolly, the first cloned sheep, was in the 90s. So there's a lot of this scientific kind of interest in those areas, and the the episode makes use of that within popular culture, within the it's a timely episode because it's bringing up things that people would recognize from media, right, from the news, these kind of stories. So yeah, it was intriguing in that regard. um I think having the sky people as a red herring, right, for Mulder and Scully was intriguing as well because it kept it within a certain vein that you then get twisted away from at a nice opportune moment, later on. So there's a nice twist in the story. Yeah, I would say for a couple different ways it's intriguing, but then there are a couple of things that were kind of stand out as being weird. I'm sure we'll get into those at some point.
I'm
I,
sure we
I,
will. Do you agree,
I,
Dan?
I agree with what you were saying about viewing it through the lens of the times that it was released in. Like watching it like the other day, I didn't think it was like that intriguing for quite a big part of the episode until like Mulder and Scully are involved in the stakes basically, and when they're with the girls and they accidentally drink the digitalis or foxglove, which I learned like the in Welsh folklore, foxglove was used to identify and ward off changelings, mythical beings who were thought to replace real children. And also I did some research about like the name Eve that comes from the Hebrew word Hawa, which means either like source of life, mother of all things, or simply living one. And I found sort of this biblical story of the way that Eve was created, i.e., from Adam's rib, maybe like analogous to like the cloning process a little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I found that interesting.
Yeah,
And
there are a lot.
also, sorry.
I was just gonna say there are a lot of layers in the story, right? A lot of things that
Mm.
were used to build up the myth or the ideas behind the story.
Mm-hmm.
Mm.
So it was originally called The Girls from Greenwich, and I think initially proposed by and written by as a story by two writers who I didn't recognize their names, and then like rewritten by Morgan and Wong, who were like in-house writers on the series whose work, having created tunes and stuff like that. Their work was sort of looked up to by the likes of Chris Carter, who's one of whose comments I found quite interesting, where he was saying that like even the opening scene of the episode, where there's two runners and they come across a little girl and find the dead guy in the swings. Chris Carter said like that's quite an unusual scene to see on network TV of that time.
Mm. Yeah, definitely. I think in terms of the era as well, there's two layers, aren't there? There's the Human Genome Project, and actually in 1993 there was the first successful creation of a cloned human embryo. So it was literally, the zeitgeist of the time. But I think there was also this idea around, nature versus nurture in terms of there were particularly, well, in the UK we had the case of Jamie Bulger. There was a little kid who was horrifically assaulted and then murdered by two young children. And they were the youngest boys ever to be, in prison for murder, basically in the UK. Later in the 90s, Columbine shootings wasn't there, and there was the case of Eric Smith as well in the US. So I think there was a real discussion around why are children turning bad, why are children turning evil, why have they got this capacity for evil? What are we doing to our children? What's going wrong, kind of thing. And there's those different layers to that, I think, isn't there? Of, you could on the one hand be incredibly powerful as humanity to the point where you could replicate yourself fully in a human genome project, kind of way. But actually, when you're reproducing and having these children, what is it that's lacking in the nurture? Or is there something intrinsic about evil or whatever else you want to call it, that whatever you do, it will come through and it will manifest in the form of children?
Well, the idea as well that in vitro fertilization was just taking off. Right? It was in its infancy, say in the 70s again, but it was starting to become very popularized, much more successful as well. And there's a lot of risk and concern, right, about going into a clinic. You're going to get, ideally the combination of genetic material that you bring in yourselves, and cross fingers and hope.
Absolutely. And I think there is that thing, isn't it, of, where the mother is initially interviewed by Scully and she's saying, did you give birth to the child? Is she your child? And the mother's obviously completely indignant, like, obviously this is my child, I've got the videos, I can prove it. I've got all the, and then at the end, I think, what's really shocking is she's so quick to give her child up. And, there's kind of discussion about why that might be, which we can maybe come on to later. But yeah, that journey, I think, from the mother who's completely committed to her child, being like so possessive and so tiger mum about it, through to the complete, do you know what? No, I don't want anything to do with it. And it makes you wonder about, like, as adults, when and why we reject children, and what is it that we want from children ultimately, when we're bringing them up or being alongside them.
Well, regarding genetic engineering and stuff like that, I was just thinking about how, like, before this episode, they'd had, like, the history of after Nietzsche writing about Ubermensch and stuff like that, and the Nazis taking it in a completely, like, murderous, like, horrendous direction.
Well,
absolutely.
Folklore all over the world, right, is filled with stories of children or fake children of fairy folk, right? The changelings. You've got myths that are there to communicate that when the natural world, when a child comes wrong, it's not your fault as the parent. It's the way the spirits were at play, right? And it helped keep the parent of a child that had a defect or whatever, right? It gave them solace to recognize that it wasn't from within, but it came from without. The problem came from without. And that's what the mom, I think, does. She says, I didn't create this child. It's not my child, right? So this is not, it's not wrong because I am flawed. Somebody else did this to me. I'm the victim.
Sort of the same sort of defense that the biblical Eve might use. Like, she was the mother to, like, Cain and Abel, where, like, there was the first, according to the Bible, the first historically recorded murder.
Right.
Yeah, and that was between brothers, wasn't it? It's fratricide. So and again, it's that thing of, like, most kind of murders and most cases of abuse, do happen within families. And it's like, I mean, if we think about what the girls do, to begin with, they kill off their fathers, and it's that complete rejection, isn't it? And I think at one point they're asked to justify it, and they're like, well, they weren't our fathers. It's as simple as that. Right. So there's real rejection on both sides, actually, isn't there? And that we weren't born, we were created. Well, if you're created, what does that mean? And for children of IVF, I think in that era, there was a certain amount of, well, am I, natural? Am I? And of course, absolutely. But, there was a fear around that form of new technology, I guess, and what that would mean. And would you be a natural child or an IVF child? And what would be the difference with that?
Well, I remember one of the taunts that was popular in the 90s and late 80s, early 90s was test tube baby. Kids would taunt each other with that language, right? Oh, you're a test tube baby. No, I'm not. Yes, no kid didn't understand what it really meant, but there was, like, they just grabbed it as a taunt. Sorry, Dan, you were saying?
I was remembering, I'm sure it's from Greek mythology, where I think it's mythological. there's like the idea that you want to have sex with your mother and kill your father.
Mm.
Yeah, the Oedipal complex.
Yeah. And this being sort of a reversal of that, where the girls kill their father.
Yeah, absolutely. And then get drawn back into ultimately the mother, don't they, in terms of that final scene? You know, they're all there together, aren't they? And you know, there's that kind of, well, what's going to happen now? And we'll come to that in a bit, I'm sure. So we've talked a little bit about this, but you know, is it important that there's this sort of setup at the beginning of, oh, it's another alien thing, it was cattle mutilation, it's clearly, you know, some abductions going on. Does that work as a red herring? Was it necessary, do you think, or was it a distraction?
No, I think it worked because it was the inroad to get the team together, right? It was an inroad to get Mulder and Scully there, right? So that's what kept all of us interested, I think. This idea of, you know, sky people, and they replicated the abduction. They made the abduction seem like it's, you know, little green men or little grays. So I thought it worked well.
I thought it was great, and it gave some sort of variety to the storytelling in a way, rather than Mulder like always being right, as he usually is in like the older episodes, especially in the first season, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And linking onto that, obviously part of the story is, you know, oh, there was red lightning, you know, but it was only claimed by one of the two girls. Why do we think that was?
Well, I think it was foreshadowing. I think it was, you know, what we come to find out is that they just knew that this is what they had to do, and they had to do it in a certain way. They just knew, but the stories didn't completely match because they weren't exact. So those little
Well,
details helped to kind of raise a questioning, you know, a red flag, if you will, that something may be a little bit off.
I thought that it may have been accidental, simply because like they hadn't met each other yet. But I thought maybe it was deliberate to throw investigators off the possibility that they were the culprits.
What, that
Yeah,
it would be too weird a detail to be exact?
Yeah.
And it would feel like a setup. Yeah. Were we
yeah, they're
surprised then
very
by the fact
intelligent
that
kids in the
yeah,
stories.
absolutely. And that's the thing, you know, and children come up with incredible narratives, don't they, all the time? And it's like, yeah, we should never be surprised at what they're capable of, really. Which links into the idea of, you know, were we surprised by the fact that the murders were committed by the girls then? Or did we see that coming from the beginning?
Like, I honestly can't remember. I saw this episode for the first time like ages ago, so yeah, I can't remember. I think so.
Well, the hints that something was off was the language that the girls used, right, during the episode, and what was reported to have been their explanation, right? Um, I was when I watched it through, I didn't know how they would have accomplished what they were supposed to have done without tools or without a place to dispose of, you know, the blood that they drew out of, right? Because there was no cleanup necessary, so they must have been using syringes and hoses and other means, right? Because they're too small to move the bodies, so they would have had to take advantage of wherever they fell, right? So there were some things that were a little bit odd, as shall we say, right? In terms of the storytelling. But yeah, it was one of those things you kind of gloss over for the narrative. One of the things that bothered me as well was when we first see the body of the father, right? His face is ashen, but the rest of him is pink, flush, right? It looked like a really terrible makeup job. Someone said, "Oh, he looks too lively. Let's cover that up." So they went, "Okay, get 30 seconds, go." because it looked like a mask. It literally was
Yeah.
like this around his face, right?
Yeah,
And then his
I
lips,
agree.
right? But then his jawline and his neck was all pink and flush. It was so weird.
I found the method of murder really surreal. I mean, it just felt like it was so unnecessarily complicated. If you want to kill somebody and you've got digitalis, you just do that. Do you know what I mean? And why would they want to set it up to attract the attention of, I mean, clearly they're not trying to bring in, the X-Files investigators, but why make it
Right.
so weird, right? Murders unfortunately happen all the time, poisonings, whatever, happen all the time. You could have framed it as a suicide and nobody would have questioned it. So I did find that straight. And it was almost like an elaborate game playing thing, I guess. And maybe that was part of the fun, was they were reveling in that and reveling in the mystery, and actually were a bit disappointed when then all the investigators went was, oh, poor little girls, yes, we'll look after you now. It's like, oh, great, we've gone to the effort of staging all this. We've, got all these syringes hidden in some sort of trunk somewhere, who knows. So that felt to me like a missed opportunity, really, either for the girls to reveal had they done it later on and like nobody even questioned how we did the following things, which would have been a great boastful kid moment, or for the just to have been a bit of a, okay, but this is still completely unexplained, as opposed to, well, they were mad, so they did it, and now they're locked up. It's like, but how?
Yeah,
Well,
the more complicated. Go ahead, Dan.
One theory I've always had for years, anyway, is that like they know they're in a TV series. They know what's going to happen. if they like make it look like UFO abduction scenario, they know that Mulder and Scully will be on the scene. They've got everything planned out.
Do you think they're just fans of the X-Files, actually, and they'd really wanted an entry? It's like, we're going to go down in the history books, the ones that matter. Yeah, in a basement.
Well, but they know that if they go this route, then it will bring them back with Eve 8.
So they're sort of using the agents as kind of a way of connecting. I like that idea.
And I just thought that
we just knew.
I just thought that they're very intelligent, but they're also inexperienced, right? And you mentioned gameplay. They're kids. They're intelligent kids. And, the best villains are the really super intelligent ones who are arrogant, because in their arrogance, they make mistakes. Yeah. And I think the same thing happens with kids, right? Kids, they get very arrogant at times, and that's where they falter. So they wanted it to be needlessly complex because that was the fun part for them. They wanted it needlessly complex because it was a demonstration of their skills and their talents, right? And yeah, I think that in order for them to come together, which is what they really wanted, right? They needed a splash. They needed attention. Otherwise, they would have done it differently, right?
I think you can apply to a lot of what you just said to the writers of the episode as well. Like, they wanted to make a splash. I was thinking about why I found them convincing. I think I did anyway initially, which is like I wrote down appearances can be deceiving, like the diminutive size of the girls, for example.
And the more you get the girls to let's say they did a big reveal at some point where they showed the girls going about the business of killing the fathers, or they had the girls talking about. Remember, these are girls, right? These are 10-year-old actors. You don't want them to be recounting, in an interview room, the death sequence, of steps they took. It's traumatizing for the actors. So I think they left some of that off the books for that reason.
And not only that, but like clearly, like the writing staff knew, like, it can be more effective the less that you see.
Yeah, definitely. And I guess, in terms of the storytelling as well, if they are telepathic, they don't need to say anything out loud. They both know. That's the thing that matters, I thought it was interesting when Mulder and Scully go and visit the Eve that's institutionalized, the Eve that's been locked up, and she's very childlike. Actually, she wants to boast. I bit his eyeball. I meant it as a sign of affection. All that. I've got an IQ of that. I mean, it's very much like validate me, look at me. I'm proud of what I am. And she's clearly been broken and tested on, and these horrible things have happened to her. But on some level, it's created a weird Arrested Development kind of thing, hasn't it? Where actually she's just more childlike than the children are, which is very interesting. The children play the role of children, but she is still in that state. So it's an interesting contrast.
So,
And I guess, yeah, go on.
Sorry, I read like an article in the book about Eve, and it was saying like at the time that it was released, there were many women imprisoned. But like to me, like watching that scene, it seemed like really quite Silence of the Lambs with Anthony Hopkins. Sort of.
Yeah, very much that, wasn't it? Yeah, even down to the lighting and the framing, and yeah, there was a lot of illusions there, I think. So I guess bringing that back to the idea of the little girls being little girls, then why do Scully and Mulder continue to believe these girls even when they know what they truly are? So even when they found out key details about them, they found out the genetic history, they found out there's the capacity there for heightened strength but heightened psychosis, the probability is these are psychotic children. Why do they just treat them like little kids, and why do they believe them still?
Because that's what adults do. We're hardwired to look at children smaller than us and predisposed to thinking of them, as needing protection. We're hardwired. It's not. I don't have to have a kid in the burning building. If there's a kid in the burning building, right? Adults want to save the child. They will want to do something to protect. It's just an instinctive thing. It's the nature of the human experience that we're wired to take care of children. That's why it's such an effective tool to use for marketing. If companies want your money, they're going to put a kid somewhere in the ad and get you to pay attention.
But I think also there's a lot of events that you see as the viewer, but Mulder and Scully are not privy to. I was thinking like what they are aware of, and I think quite a significant event that they are aware of is that Sally Kendrick kidnaps the children.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And ultimately they've just, whether they did it or not, they've just been through the death of their fathers. So there's lots of layers where you could kind of go, oh, they are victims as well as, but I don't know. I found it really, really surprising that they've just been given all this information about, the IQ, the psychotic tendency, the everything else. At that point, I would have gone, I think they're the killers. And I think there was a line when they say, oh, for a while, I was thinking it might be the girls. And it's like, yeah, it is. Like, I found myself sort of shouting at the screen a bit at that. But I think that's a good point that sort of Brad made earlier of like, we don't want to believe that children are capable of terrible things, even though we know they are, because the role of adults is to train them out of doing terrible things that are self-indulgent or selfish or harmful, because, that's how we train them to become better people or cope in society or whatever, But I think it's really interesting when you see the children interacting with other adults as well. So like there's when they're on the run and there's all the trucks and things, and and the guy comes out and he's like, what, these are America's Most Wanted? Yeah, right. Little girls get in the truck, there's that stuff. And even the bit where they take the drinks away and say, oh, my dad will pay for it. Just the absolute, I'm looking you in the eyes as a cute little girl. You're going to challenge me on it. It's a bit Home Alone stuff, isn't it, I guess? But, there's all of that there, which I think is really interesting. But I was surprised that, because, Scully from a scientific level would believe it because it's genetics, and Mulder would believe it surely from the point of view of, so why were they still convinced? I'm not sure.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting. Oh, sorry. I thought it's interesting you talked about like the woman that gives them the drinks. It occurred to me like because the girls may be telepathic, maybe they're using like telepathic suggestion on her.
Yeah. So it's additional manipulation on Scully and Mulder even.
Oh
as well.
No, I meant on the
waitress.
I meant the waitress.
Yeah, but by consequence, surely they would therefore manipulate anyone that they wanted to manipulate, right?
I think that I'm prepared to, entertain that idea of, telekinesis. I'm not sure that there's much in the text to support that, but that's one possibility. I think, kids, they don't need to be telekinetic to be able to manipulate. They
Mm.
do a very good job of manipulating their parents all the time.
Exactly.
And I think the fact that Sculder, Mully, Mulder, Mulder and Scully, kind of they fall into. It gives us insight into their characters.
Mm.
Okay,
Mhm.
because there's faith and hope, right, as central core tenets of Scully's faith, and she wants to protect. You could see how she talks to the girls. She talks to them in a very, very maternal way, right? During the early part of the show. So we get a sense of her being motherly and gentle. And well, Mulder, his sister, right? There's a hearkening back to this kind of young child sister relationship. Not that not they do anything more than that, but it's just there's that connection. And when they walk into that restaurant, he's holding the girls by their hands, right? He walks in as though he's the dad. And sure, that might have been a directing choice, that might have been the actor making a choice, but it fit very well with the character and the backstory as the protector, the older brother, right?
Mm.
So I think that they want to believe that the girls are good because that's what they're predisposed to because of their own journeys, right? They want to trust the girls, and they're giving the benefit of the doubt, so to speak, right?
Mm.
And the girls they pick up on that, right? You show kindness to a kid, boy, they're coming back at you 100 times.
Mm.
You give them a candy. 10 minutes later, do you have another candy? No, I don't have another candy. Oh, could you get some? No. Oh.
That's a
Well,
very
there
good
was
impression of a child, Brad. I'm very impressed.
there was a moment like after they leave is it a diner?
Yeah.
Yeah. Where it really sort of irked me, and I thought like that's maybe not the best directing, or at least the best acting, I think, from Gillian Anderson, where she was just like looking at the girls, and I was sort of like you said earlier when you were saying you should basically shouting at the TV. I was like, is she not going to say anything to the girls? She's just going to stand there.
Yeah, I agree. I found both of them remarkably dim, but I understand certainly from kind of Brad's description of why that might be. That maybe I'm being a bit harsh on them both. Maybe there's a really powerful instinct there to protect, and they're blinded by that, and they're blinded by wanting to protect these children rather than see them as potential criminals, which and that's when people don't want to believe what young people are capable of in positive and negative ways. Actually, we underestimate the capacity, I think.
Right.
Okay. So there's a question here, and we spoke briefly about this before we came on air, didn't we? And we weren't necessarily sure about it, but it says, what do you make of some of the director's choices in terms of circles and tunnels?
Well, you guys were talking about, Dan, you were mentioning circles and and how it was referenced, and there's a lot of archways, there's a lot of openings, there's a lot of hallways, there's a lot of this framing. It's part of that is just because of how the locations they were picking, I'm sure, but you guys made a great point earlier about the circle of life, so to speak, right? Coming full circle, repetition. So, go ahead and share those.
I think definitely in terms of symbolism, I mean, circles, it's this idea of a space, a never-ending space, and that's the idea of genetic, hereditary, and everything moving on. But it's also this idea of like female power, and like I think Dan, you were saying it's like a circle is part of the shape of, you know, the symbol for woman, isn't it? And that's because it comes back to that yonic energy and yonic kind of symbolism to do with the womb and like vagina and reproduction, and so it's a symbol of ultimate power. And in most kind of pre-Christian societies, a symbol, a circle, was the most powerful symbol that you could do. You would cast the magic circle, you know, people would be kept within a family circle. It's a very powerful kind of source. So, and there were lots of shots where they were, yeah, there was sort of a window in the shape of a circle or various other things, which was framing. And
And
thinking,
also,
yeah, go on.
sorry,
No, go on.
also I was remembering how, like, basically the symbol of the circle, the Ouroboros, is the symbol of Millennium that Chris Carter worked on later.
Yeah, definitely.
Well, and
Yeah.
those images call to mind, you know, terms like revolution and evolution, right? And this is what is core to the idea of the episode, right? This revolution, this return, this cyclical kind of movement of a clock, or movement of time, or movement of you know, renewal. But also this evolution, this idea that, you know, you are improving, you're getting stronger or better, or, you know, at the time, if we look at it in context of the Human Genome Project and the cloning of the 90s and 80s, that, you know, this is cutting edge science. There's a lot of questions about what does it mean to have a clone? Does that clone have a soul? You know, if you look at it from a religious context, does that clone a truly individual person, or are they the property of the one whose material is used, right? Are they an extension of the individual, right? A lot of literature from that time explored those notions. You know, there's lots of really interesting, even from before then, the 1950s and 60s, some great literature that was created about an exploration of the use of cloning, the use of clones as spare parts for human beings. You know, if you need a heart, don't bother with a pig heart. Let's just clone you a new body, and we'll harvest the organs. So that individual clone has no rights. They're just property. So there's lots of morals and spiritual and religious and societal questions that come to play in all of that, right? Not to mention, is it even a good thing for the government to be involved in producing and holding on to, and, you know, using these children, right? I mean, it's terrible to think of it, you know. Anyway.
Absolutely. No, I think, and there was a big kind of, I can't remember what it was a few years back, but there was a big case, and it was talking about donor siblings, and it was basically parents who had children with existing health conditions who would benefit from some bone marrow or a kidney or whatever, and
Absolutely.
effectively people were having babies so that they could produce. And it becomes, well, what are people trying to do, and why are they trying to do it? And, you know, with the creation of children, be that, you know, biologically or in a lab, it's all about the moral responsibility, and it's about the intentionality of that choice. So yeah.
Can you imagine the scarring of the child that was born just to donate marrow?
Yeah.
Right. And they've come to know that, and and maybe they're loved and cared for and nurtured as best as they can be, but when it comes time to harvest, that kid has got to be wondering, you know. And it's that, though simple asking them the question, that's the scar, you know.
Absolutely.
Terrible
And when
times.
the girls comment on that themselves, don't they? They're like, well, why should we care about anyone? Nobody cared about us. Effectively, we were just created.
Right.
And, you know, why should there be any moral responsibility when that's why you've been brought into the world. And this whole idea of, I mean, Russian eugenics is sort of name dropped in there, but there's allusions to Nazis and there's allusions to US, UK practice as well. And it's this idea of, well, why are we doing it? So we're trying to create a super soldier, superpower. We're trying to eradicate genetic diseases or genetic traits that we don't deem to be, matching our idea of a healthy mind and body. And that's when it gets really messy, isn't it? And I
Well,
guess that goes all the way back,
China today is already exploring genetic engineering of embryos. They've allowed the practice of genetically modifying. I mean, and I think there's some of that already being done in the U.S. to kind of pre-screen for certain defects, right? So you can just pre-screen, but in China, these are designer babies that are being allowed. We have no idea what the result is going to be when you edit that chromosomal makeup. No idea. It is an experiment, and we are going to reap the whirlwind on that.
But I think also like there's a difference. Like you're saying, presumably like edit you're using as emissions in the genome, but I thought it was interesting. Like the Eves have more chromosomes than
Right.
most people. 56 rather than 46.
And I think because for ages, they were trying to reduce it down, weren't they, in terms of not number of chromosomes, but, oh, well, this one does this and this one does that. And it's just obviously not how it works. It's so many combinations and, it's so complicated that, the arrogance of mankind to think, oh, we'll just switch that one off and we'll just turn that one on. Like Brad's saying, it's, the outcomes are potentially abhorrent. And I mean, this has been presented in literature, I would argue, since Frankenstein. I mean, what you can, when you look at Kendrick's intentions here and the scientists before Kendrick, it's all about them, isn't it? It's all about, what can they achieve? What can we do if we play gods? And actually, well, they're just test subjects, so we can dispose of them anyway. I think it was interesting when they said that the Eves and the Adams, who have clearly completely gone, were all prone to suicide. It's like, well, yeah. Is it that heightened intelligence and just awareness of, well, I am monstrous as far as you're concerned, so what's the point in me being a being at all? So yeah, it's a really interesting one, and it's kind of
The
ways
hubris, the sheer hubris
yeah.
of people who believe they are somehow all the negative consequences, the possibilities of those consequences are the possibilities of consequence does not match the benefit, right? So they see the benefit, the immediate fame or the acclaim or whatever, the achievement is far greater than the possible consequence. It's just hubris, because that's never how it is. That's never how it is. It's just a trade-off. Are you trading your fame and your success for the suffering of untold thousands or tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of people? It's ridiculous.
Absolutely. We touched on this earlier, but I think for me, one of the most powerful moments in the episode is where Mrs. Reardon, severs her emotional ties to her daughter, sets fire to the picture, and rejects her. And I'm still in two minds about why she's so, like, I don't know, so willing to just cut her daughter off at that point and just completely disown her. And is that because she discovers that, her genetic origins are different, or is it because she discovers that she's a murderer, which, or just a combination of the two? But I don't know what you guys think about this, because it's just such a powerful moment, I think, that wasn't necessary, particularly in the storyline. It would have been fine without it. So it's there for a reason. What do you think is the importance of that moment?
Go ahead, Dan.
I don't think it's that realistic. I thought it felt like they were deliberately tying the story up with a bow at the end, and it came too soon. But I thought, like, from her perspective, I think that it is based on the child's actions. Because doesn't she find out earlier, like, about the child's origin, her daughter's origin? Very good daughter. And it's only at that point, at the end, as far as I can remember, that she's like disowns the girl.
You know, the girl. So the mother that's the father, the first father that was killed, right? The mother died of cancer
Yeah.
prior. So the second girl, Eve 10, let's call her, she's killed the father, most likely has designs on killing the mother as well, right? So when mom loses her husband, she's torn, right? And she just wants to sink her emotions into protecting her child. So she's transferring all of her own pain, right, to a box somewhere, and she's dealing with her daughter's pain and her daughter's issues. But when she comes to find out that her daughter is not really her biological daughter, right, now she realizes that the daughter has killed the husband, her partner, the man she's loved, and most likely would have killed her as well, right? Because she's psychotic, and it's a sanity saving strategy to reject and to say, not me. That's not my fault. I didn't create that. She's not my daughter. Right? I may have birthed her, but I was just the womb. This is somebody else's genetic material. This is not ours. Right? So yeah, I would say that it's all about the rejection, which may be symbolic of the rejection that society gives for those who are deemed defective,
Absolutely.
who don't have any benefit to the larger group.
I think there's a real question, isn't there, about the treatment of people who demonstrate psychosis and who do not adhere to the rules of society.
Right.
Because, yeah, if your own mother, and I know there's the biological argument, and I fully take your point on the self-preservation thing as well, mental and physical. But if your own mother would just give up on you so willingly and you get put into a treatment center where they're going to help her, they're not. She's never coming back, is she? She's going to escape, obviously, is the sort of kick at the end. But yeah, I think it's really interesting, and we've talked before on this show about how people with mental illness are treated and are they believed, and etc. etc. In this case, nobody doubts what these girls have done because of the things that they've been told by other Eves and whatever else.
Right.
But it's certainly, yeah, there's no level of care or willingness to try and rehabilitate these girls. It's very much, no, they are appalling and they're destined to just be monsters forever. And so we lock them up and we throw away the key, which is quite terrifying, I think.
Well, that's in a sense, that's what society has to do, or rather, that was an attitude of the time. Criminals who are obvious bad guys are locked up for life. And the problem we have today is that we realize that that's not rehabilitation, that's isolation. And society's wrestling with those decisions as well right now, right? Because it became quite punitive for very minor issues, very minor, right? People lost in prison for 20 years for drug possession, for a drug that's now legal in many countries around the world, right? And some of those guys are still in prison, because they were tried under laws of a different era. So society tends to want to. Some European societies are exploring different things, and then there's indigenous cultures that have healing circles and try different ways of rehabilitating and keeping the community whole. But unfortunately, even indigenous populations believe in banishment, and that's what prisons are. They're banishing people for a period of time. So I think there's probably a societal commentary there.
I fully agree. Definitely. So within this narrative then, do you think that there would have been any chance that nurture could have overcome their genetic predispositions. I mean, the parents aren't presented as being problematic or difficult or abusive, are they? They're just ordinary, I suppose. So would there be any hope for these girls in terms of rehabilitation?
What was the woman's name who was the doctor?
Sally Kendrick.
Sally Kendrick.
Yeah, so there's Sally Kendrick, but then there's the other Eve that became a doctor as well, right?
Yeah.
So to me, it seems like, yeah, of course there's
Eve 8.
there's opportunity, right? But that's where the nurture part comes in, right? If you don't have a really strong nurturing environment, the nature you're predisposed by your nature, right? Just like some people are genetically predisposed to diabetes, or genetically predisposed to alcoholism, or genetically predisposed to not be able to process corn, right? When they're eating corn, there's biologically predetermined elements to their makeup, and some of those things also are relating to their genetic kind of dispositions for certain ailments and psychological conditions. So you can't beat nature. You can only try to tame it a little bit. And I think that's what nurture does.
I thought it was
So in-
interesting how Sally Kendrick was portrayed, because I thought it was like leading you to believe basically that potentially like they could overcome their genetic predispositions, but then she seems as though she's about to kill the Eve girls herself.
Yeah.
Which so
When she recognises, yeah. It's almost a last ditch
really
attempt.
overcome
Isn't
Yeah.
it? Yeah.
Wasn't there was a TV show, it's still on now, but it was popular, say 10 years ago or so, called Dexter.
Yes.
Right? A serial killer who was adopted, and the parent was a serial killer, or
That's it. Yeah.
right, recognized the qualities,
Basically
so taught
trained him. It was a book series as well.
Okay, so
But that,
it was
yeah.
it was almost like he was training him how to manage himself in society. And I wonder if that's the same kind of scenario here, where the Eve, Sally Kendrick, was saying, look, you can lead productive lives. You don't have to be slave to your nature, right? You could overcome some of those things and lead a life of, joy, or you could have been happy, or, at least you could kill people in secret, right? But it just struck me as almost a futile effort, because that's the rarity. The rarity is to find the golden gem of a situation that is perfect for that one. And that's what the story was telling us, right? Because the Eve that was in the prison didn't get that, and she spiraled into the worst scenario. And it seemed like there were a number of Eves that didn't survive because of, those same kind of things. So I think that was also the commentary, that it's possible, but it's a rarity.
You
And I
see
guess
the
Go on, Dan.
you see that black and white picture of the Eves, and there's like so many of them. And
Yeah.
apparently the plan initially, or some consideration at least to it, was to have like all the child Eves played by the same girl and just do split screen. But then they realized like that would require too much information, too much, work, visual effects wise and acting wise, I guess. And that's when they cast twins.
Who I think were exceptional, by the way. We haven't really talked about performances, but yeah, I mean, playing creepy children is a very specific thing, isn't it? But I thought they did it brilliantly. It was very impressive.
I thought it was really interesting that was the final role they ever played.
Oh, was it? Oh.
It was the what, Dan? Sorry?
It was the last role they ever played.
Oh, because they look very similar to an adult actress that I've seen. She's done lots of different roles, but she's currently in a Amazon series called something Range.
Outer Range.
Outer Range. She's the wife.
Yeah.
So she looks very similar to those kids. Look similar to her. So I wondered about that.
Or maybe she's a clone, of course. That's the other logical conclusion, isn't it?
Cecilia Abbott. Is that not the woman that's in the X-Files episode Mind's Eye? I think.
Don't know. I have to check that one.
It's the same actress.
Yeah, got me.
Cool.
But yeah, she doesn't appear any.
I guess to pick up that point from slightly earlier. So if there is a way then of identifying through analysis of people's DNA, analysis of, genes, that you could work out which people are predispositioned to violence, like more so than average, which people have psychotic tendencies, and I'm using that as a very kind of loose term, and you could find a program of nurture that would specifically benefit those individuals. Would those kind of consequences ever justify genetic screening, do you think? Not to eliminate those people at, pre-birth, but to say these children have been born, they have got these tendencies, they're going to need particular care. Would that ever be justifiable, do you think?
Well, Brave New World. Huxley postulated that exact scenario, right? And you can see the consequences of that, right? It became hierarchical, and genetic predisposition became class strata. And you can't move beyond your strata. You were who you were, and that's what you did. You were bred for certain roles, certain jobs. I think that's why there's so much bitterness about in Western society. There's some bitterness about gathering data on your genetic material, your genetic makeup. You want to keep it private. You want to keep it separate. You want to own it. You don't want to give it away. And as you were asking that question, I was thinking, well, they've got lots of data through our internet functioning, right? They can tell a lot about us individually, as well as us as groups. They can tell our attitudes. They can tell our belief systems. They can tell our choices based on the data they've collected over the last 20 years via the internet through large multinational corporations like Facebook, or what do they call it, Meta now, right? And Amazon, the purchasing histories, and there's lots of, and any internet service provider, right? They're gathering all this data.
I would say that I don't entirely agree with what you're saying, because it's really about what we're communicating would be like our belief systems, because like you may say that you're whatever, Jewish, Christian, Hindu, whatever, communicate that to the world, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you are, and that they still don't have the capacity to actually read people's minds, which I think we could be thankful for.
No, but what they have the capacity to do is to tailor make the information that you're being given to nudge you in certain directions based on the search histories and the information you've gathered prior, so they can pump you full of targeted information, targeted ads to elicit a certain response from you, so that they can get money, but also so they can shift your attitudes about certain things, so that you will be impacted or less likely or more likely to do things. They're trying to get certain results based on your predispositions or the information they've gathered from you prior. So it's the same as it's that genetic issue.
And that's an interesting, go on.
I was just going to say, they use that information just to if they're tweaking the population's attitudes about, say, fear, like security, right? Because 5 years from now, they want to introduce a bill that would restrict personal freedoms. How do you do that? You make people afraid, and you build it up, and you get media to do that as much as possible, whatever type of media. It just happens that the internet lets them do that much more efficiently, much more quickly, right? Anyway,
I fully agree, and I think no, not at all. I think it's all really valid, and there's when we use that word nurture, we instinctively think that's a positive thing, but of course it's not always, is it? You can nurture fear. You can nurture a predisposition to hate a particular group or a particular attitude. And, and working in a school, it is absolutely evident where young people get their sources of information from and how that shifts over time. And these people, as we all are, if we participate with any form of online life, are being nurtured and manipulated constantly. So it's that sense of, what is it that we know to be true because we feel it or we believe it, in our very core, and what's open to manipulation, and therefore what are we being shaped into? And I think that's kind of one of the most important messages of this episode, actually. It's that, yes, you can literally have your genetics designed and packaged and you can be the same as a bunch of others, but actually there is the capacity to behave differently according to what world you're nurtured within.
Because what would happen? What would happen if a government decided or a community decided, right? Let's say Singapore decided that they're going to pass a law that says anyone who's born within the city borders of Singapore are going to be screened. This is the government now. They're going to screen for certain genetic predispositions. And if you have those predispositions, because within the population, it's proven to be a burden on the healthcare when they've aged to a certain point. So they say, well, we're going to screen those out. We're just going to say no. So every visitor who comes to Singapore, who happens to, they're there residing for a few years, they start having family. But even though they're not a member of Singaporean society, or they're not, part of that, they're not residents of. They're just kind of transitory. But to give birth in the hospitals, it's a law. So their child is screened for that. And let's say they don't say we're going to manipulate the genetic material. We're going to, turn off that switch, but we're going to say that those pregnancies have to be terminated. Okay, so what happens now? You suddenly start losing a lot of a lot of babies in vitro, and that's a terrible thing. But some government says that's the law. That's how we're going to handle that particular issue. Government says it, so does that make it okay? That's the kind of scenario. It's not individuals that I'm so much worried about. It's corporations and it's governments. What happens if some corporation figures out a way to as they've done with the Monsanto, right? The seeds. What they've done, they've figured out a genetic combination that is unique. They figure it out and they sell it. And anyone who happens to have those seeds growing on their properties, well, they sue them and they take over, and it's a terrible scenario. But because they've figured out how to monetize it, they're going to do that. So some government somewhere says, okay, we're going to give you a patent on that particular seed structure. So someone says, okay, well, I'm going to tweak the blues in the for eye color to a certain shade, and I'm gonna that corporation now owns that. They have copyrighted that, so it happens naturally in nature, right? Every 10,000 births, there's this eye color, but because they've copyrighted it, the parent's gonna have to pay a certain premium. And it's going to be really tricky once you start figuring out or start utilizing some of those things in society.
I was thinking of the concept of even in the UK, the concept of there being the royal family based on genetics. Similar.
Exactly. So final couple of questions then. So what do we predict is going to happen with the Eves at the end then?
Armageddon.
Good. That's nice and clear.
I think Eve 8 ends up freeing the others, and they'll go on a sinister international murder spree, but finally either captured or killed themselves by law enforcement.
Ooh, I think they'd kill each other after a while, unless they realised that as a pack they were stronger. But I wonder how far it would go, or if it would be like intergenerational violence, so the younger ones would plot to kill the older ones and eradicate them. Ah, happy thoughts. No happy ending then. Would we have liked any of the characters from this episode to reappear later in the series? Was there anyone that we felt would have been good recurring?
I think it might have been interesting to have seen one of the Eve girls fully grow and help and consult on the case. I also quite like this foreshadows like the whole super soldier sort of thing from later in the X-Files. And regarding that, I thought like it might have been cool like if they'd been brought back for the colonization event. It was predicted for 2012 in truth.
No.
Thank you, Brad.
No.
That's good to know. So finally then, how many X's out of 10 would we give this episode? Let's start
8.
with Dan. 8. Go on then, Dan. Why 8?
I just think it's a great episode.
Excellent. Thank you, Dan. Brad.
I think, sorry, I've been quite verbose about things, but I really liked the way they wrote Mulder and Scully in the episode. They gave them a little bit of a playfulness, a little bit of a casualness that was a little bit lighter than they normally are in previous episodes. So this kind of broadened out, their characters a little bit more, made them a little bit deeper or a little bit more textured, let's say. So I really enjoyed that aspect of the episode. And of course the acting, the actress who played the adult Eves, I thought she was really good. And the kids were, sufficiently, creepy, and but they didn't do more than was necessary. And again, that's the good sign for me. That's the mark of good character actors. Yeah, I would give it an 8. I was pretty happy with it overall.
Yeah, I'm going to match you guys. I thought it was based on the acting, based on the exploration of what was a really important issue and continues to be a really important issue. Thought he did a great job with it. And yeah, it all felt like pretty tight storytelling. There were a few bits that, definitely could have sharpened up, which I've discussed earlier in the discussion. But yeah, I really enjoyed it. And watching it again was great, actually. I noticed a lot that I hadn't really thought about before. I didn't have it in my head as one of my favourite episodes at all. But rewatching it, I was like, oh, actually, it was pretty clever. It was pretty powerful. Given the episode that we looked at last week as well, it felt like it really is, a show that was getting into its stride, and a show that had, real capacity to turn its hand to lots of different things. So fantastic. And Brad never apologized for being verbose. That's literally why we're here. It's a beautiful thing.
What I liked about this episode is that it seemed to be almost like a standalone. Right? It was just an episodic, and it didn't have to be anything more than that. It didn't have anything that went long, kind of multi-episode arc or anything. It gave us insight into the characters. It told us something new, and it gave us a fun, traumatic kind of story to tell. Well, it gave us a lot of background into cattle mutilations, right? And a lot of those, that big other X-Files kind of topic of the 80s and 90s. So it did its job, which is why it was so good.
Absolutely. Well, thank you very much to the panelists for joining this discussion. We hope that you, our viewers, have enjoyed it as well. Do let us know in the comments section what you thought about this episode. And please remember to like and subscribe to the video. And we will see you next time. The truth is still out there, everyone. Bye.